go to Psalm 31. That's where we're going to be this morning, Psalm 31. One of the joys of being a parent is the experiencing new firsts, seeing the new, the first things with your kids. It is, of course, there are the first steps, the first words, and all of that, and that's good. But really, what I find as the joy are the first things, like the first time tasting like lemon juice. Like that's where the joy comes from for me. Like this is where, yes, okay, this is where there's some redeeming value here in parenting, and you got changing the diapers and waking up, but then at least I get to have the experience of watching my kid just like squirm for a minute, and I know that sounds wrong, but. You've thought it too, so all right. So it's but one of the things that I remember is that kind of just stays with me is when one of my daughters, Sophia, she was on her first roller coaster ride, and she was riding with I think she was riding with my mom, and so I'm down watching the whole thing happen, and I was kind of surprised that she wanted to go on it to begin with, and it was just this little fair kind of thing, and so the roller coaster wasn't all that big, but it was big for her. She had never done anything like that before, and so I'm watching her go on this roller coaster, and she is just like laughing, carrying on, just having a great time. And then the hill comes, like the big hill comes, and she gets like she's free. You see the like on her face, and then she comes down the hill, and everything changes. And I don't know if did we get a picture? I don't know if we got a picture. No, we didn't. But 10:45, I'll get it. Sorry, 15. But she just has this look of terror coming down off down the hill, and she's holding on. In fact, the picture that we got was not a picture of that one, but it was another ride that we went on that her and I went on together, and she is like grabbing my arm like this, and she's holding on to the side like this, and it's like one of those. And but then we get down to the bottom of the hill, and she's laughing again, just having the time of her life. The reason I bring that up is because I know Psalm 31 is a long psalm, but I don't know if you were paying attention with what was going on with David in Psalm 31, but his experience there was a lot like my daughter's experience on a roller coaster ride. It was up and down. I mean, he walks through, he starts off in 31, he says, in you do I take refuge, let me not be put to shame. So there's some struggling going on here, and then he moves into a time where he's, in verse 7, where he's just glad, he's laughing, he's rejoicing, he's having a great time, but then by verse 9, he's holding on for dear life again. He says, be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eye is wasted from grief, my soul and my body also, for my life is spent with sorrow, and my years with sighing. My strength fails because of my iniquity, and my bones waste away. It's all throughout, actually Psalm 30 and 31, he is going through this roller coaster of emotions that where it's up and then it's down, and then it's up and then it's down, and it's just on and on. And he's like, God, I don't know what we're doing. Just so let me be put away here. Like save me from this. And then it's like, God, you are so good. God, I rejoice in you. It's just constantly throughout these two psalms. So what is going on with David here? Well, it's really not that unusual, is it? Like this is the experience of our life, right? Like you could take a snapshot of your week, and you could see probably the same thing. Or even the month, or certainly over the last year, and see that there were times where it's like, okay, God, thank you. You are so good. These are moments. This is a time where I'm rejoicing. But then you sink into this place where you're, God, where are you? Don't leave me here. Like this is just the experience of life. There are times when things are going well, and times when things are not going so well. And when we talk about times when times are going well, if we could just be honest, sometimes just going well can just mean nothing horrible is happening, right? Like nothing awful is, like you look around and it's like, all right, okay, I think everything's okay. It's one of those. And maybe for some of you, it's when the kids are just not fighting, right? Kids hadn't been fighting for a while. All right, we're good. I don't know what it is about kids fighting with one another that just absolutely makes me lose my mind. I mean, and I was thinking about it this week. Like, it has nothing to do with me. Like, it's their fight. It's not my fight. Like, I have nothing in this. And yet, I am so distressed. Like, it just, something rises up in me. And I'm like, stop it. Just stop it. Just don't say that thing. It's like, well, I said was it. Like, don't say that thing. Don't say that. Oh, I just touched her on the shoulder. Don't touch her on the shoulder. Don't do this. You're driving your mom and dad crazy. I mean, it's nuts. Just the other day, this past week, I was in the area where there were two siblings, and they were fighting. And they didn't know I was there, but I was in the area. I was right around the corner, and they were fighting. And one of them was going, yes, you did. And the other one was going, no, I didn't. Well, yes, you did. Oh, no, I didn't. And it's just like, these aren't even my kids. And I was like, this thing was rising up in me. And I'm pretty sure, in fact, I know because I saw it. One of the kids slapped the other kid in the face. And you know what I did? I took off. I just left. I snuck out of there. I'm like, nope, these are not my kids. I get enough of that at my house. I'm not getting in on this. But listen, all of us have this experience of life where you have times when things are going well, but then before you know it, it's like you just hit hard times. It seems like sometimes the bottom drops out. Things in your family are going well, but then they're not. There are times when marriage is a joy and delight, and there are times when it's just hard. There are times when things seem to click with your friends, and there are times when you just feel alone. There are times when everybody's healthy, and there are times when your health fails you, or the health of somebody that you love begins to fail. There are times when God feels near, and you can't wait to get to your knees to pray, and you cannot wait to open up your Bible to read what he has to say. And then there are times when praying and opening the Bible is the last thing on your mind. That's what David is describing here in Psalms 30 and 31. But right in the middle of all of this, David makes this statement about God that is the anchor that David is holding on to in the midst of this roller coaster of life. Because here's the thing. We saw this last week. That David's biggest fear, what he feared more than anything else, was not experiencing the presence of God. The thing that he feared more than anything else was that God would be distant from him. This is why throughout his Psalms and knowing kind of the backstory of David and how he was being attacked by his enemies and how his family issues, that oftentimes the thing that he is praying for is not simply for the situation to be resolved. The thing that he is desperate for is, God, don't leave me in this. Don't hide your face from me. Like the thing that he longed for more than anything else was the presence of God, the experience of the presence of God. And so in navigating the good times and navigating the hard times, what solace did David have when life just seemed to be so chaotic, when it seemed to be random? Like, what's today going to bring? When it seemed like injustice was winning, and when it seemed like God was a million miles away, what did David have to hold on to? Well, he tells us in Psalm 31, verse 15, he says, my times are in your hand. My times are in your hand. Times are good, times are hard. No matter what the times are, my times are in your hands. In other words, this life with this experiences that can seem so random, one day to the next, one season to the next, that David is going, it's not random. I know that it's not random. I know that I'm up and I'm down and I'm up, but I know all of the ups and downs. It's not random. It's not simply the product of circumstances. All of those moments, all of these times, my times are in your hands. In the midst of what seemed to be the chaos of life, David understood that his life, our lives, are caught up in the providence of God. Another way to say this is that God is sovereign, meaning that what happens in the world, what happens in your life, and what happens in my life, they happen because this is what God is doing. That God is doing this. That God is over it all. He is working it all out according to his purpose and his plan. In other words, God didn't just wind up the universe and just let it go and then just hope for the best. And just say, okay, and if you need me in the meantime, I'll be here. But I'm just kind of letting it go, see how this plays out. Oh, you need me? Okay, I'm in over here. Oh, something happened over here? Okay, I'm over here. Oh, you're praying? Okay, have you been good? Okay, yeah, we'll get in over here. That is not, I feel like that a lot of us have this mentality that God is just kind of letting it go, and he's just kind of on like a 911. Just like wherever. No. God is sovereign. He is ordering it all. He has a plan mapped out, that he is making it all happen according to his plan, his purpose. So since my times are in his hands, this has massive implications for our lives. And we could go on and on, but there's just kind of one general kind of statement that I want to make, and then we'll kind of break it down a little bit. But since my times are in his hands, this is kind of what I want us to walk away with today, then there are no ordinary days. There are no ordinary days. The Bible teaches and Christians believe that the best thing that anyone could possibly receive is to be reconciled to God through Jesus Christ and then experience or dwell in or abide in his presence throughout all of life. Like this is the best of life that there is. To be reconciled to God through Christ and to experience his presence for all of our days. This is the best there is. This is what we talked about last week, that there is nothing in this world that can hold me up. There's no amount of money, there's no amount of friends, there's no kind of marriage relationship or family relationship. There's nothing in this world that can hold me up. There's nothing in this world that can't be taken away from me. The job that I have, financial security, the friends that I have, my kids, my spouse, my health, all of it can be gone in a moment. And if I've made any of that the thing that I cannot live without, that I can't be happy without, then I'm in trouble. But if the one thing that I've put my hope in is the presence of God, then I can stand. Listen, I'm not saying that losing some of those things wouldn't shake me to my core. But even if it's all gone, even if it was all taken away, the source of my hope, the source of my joy can be intact if the one thing in my life is the presence of God, that I won't fall apart because what I put my hope in, my trust in, is something that can never be taken away. So if being reconciled to God in Jesus, in other words, being saved from my sin, I'm no longer an enemy of God. Understanding that this is how we come into the world. This is who we, by default, who we are. We are enemies of God. Being reconciled to God through Christ, that it took Christ, his death, his resurrection, and repentance, our faith in his death and his resurrection, that we are reconciled to God, and instead of an enemy, we become a son, we become a daughter of God. So if being reconciled to God in Jesus and then experiencing his presence is the best that I could ever be given, then anything that leads me into those things is exactly what I need. Anything that leads, if that is the best, that's the pinnacle. That's the pinnacle of joy, satisfaction, fulfillment. If that is it, reconciled to God and experiencing his presence all of my days, then anything that's going to lead me there is exactly what I need. It's exactly what you need. So God, in his kindness and his mercy, he is leading his people into these things. And every day of my life, and every day of your life, through the good and the bad and the seemingly ordinary stuff of life, with our lives, with my life in his hands, God is directing my path for my greatest good, and that is his presence. So then, there are no ordinary days. There are no ordinary days. God is using every moment, 365 days in the year, all of it, to lead me to him. The good, the hard stuff, the ordinary, mundane, routine stuff, all of it is intentional, leading me to him. That being said, since my times are in his hands, let's just break it down a bit. The good times. What's up with the good times? Well, the good times shouldn't lead me to pride. If my times are in his hands, then the good times shouldn't lead me to pride. If my times are in his hands and he is using every moment to bring me to him, to his presence, then the good times come to me because they are allowed and directed by God, meaning that the good times, or David calls them the times of prosperity or the times of pleasure, that those times are intentional. It's not just the pinnacle of my hard work. It's not just what I got because, I worked hard for this, and so then I'm just receiving the reward for what I've done. No. Any kind of good time, any kind of good season or pleasure or prosperity that comes to us is a gift from God. But listen, prosperity and pleasure is both a gift and a test. They are intentional. They don't just happen. They are intentional. They are given to us by God as a gift and a test. In Psalm 30, David is going through this journey of emotions, just like he has in Psalm 31. And he tells us in verses 6 and 7, he shows us that he's not doing the best job of handling this. He's not doing the best at handling life's ups and downs. And so he says in verse 6, he says, "As for me, I said in my prosperity, I shall never be moved." But then in verse 7, "By your favor, O Lord, you made my mountain stand strong." So during a season of prosperity, during a season of good times, on one hand, David is going, "God, this was you who did this. You're the one that made my mountain stand strong." And so knowing that prosperity comes from God, that this is a God thing, that it's a gift of God, it should have been received as a gift. Moving David towards an attitude of gratitude, toward a bigger vision of God as the one who provides. This should have led him to say, "God, look at you. Look what you have done. You are my provider. You are so generous. You have been so kind." But instead, David turned what he knew God had given to him, and he turned it in on himself, and prosperity turned him arrogant to where he says, "I shall never be moved. Man, look what I've got. Look at my life. Look what I have. My wealth, my health, everything is going great. Nobody can touch me." Isn't this what prosperity so often does to us, though? Isn't this what mountaintop experiences do so often for us? Isn't this what the good times often do for us? It gets us into a place, it turns us away from God, and it turns our attention on us. And people will talk about the problem of pain, how people walk away from Christianity because they can't see how God would allow suffering and pain, and how God would allow hard times to come on someone. And I hear people say that from time to time, but I think the bigger problem is the problem of prosperity, the problem of pleasure. That perhaps more people turn away from Christianity because of pleasure or prosperity. That's because it's so subversive. Prosperity, if not received in humility as a gift from God, it turns us inward. It puffs us up to where I think that I shall never be moved. And listen, and I've never heard someone say, "Well, I've received so much, that's why I'm turning away from Christianity." They'll never say that, but in their hearts, this is what happens. They become self-sufficient. I'm good. I got this. Oh, I'm not going to stop attending church, and I'll tip my hat to God and say, "Oh, isn't God so? He has blessed me with so much," and we know all the words. But in my heart, I shall never be moved. It turns us inward. Or we misinterpret prosperity to think that as long as things seem to be going well, then, things are good. I got family is good, and I've got friends to hang out with. I got money in the bank, and if that's the case, then God must be pleased with me. I mean, if life is going smooth, then, man, God must be good. He must be pleased. Everything must be fine here. And that's because we're conditioned to think that any good gift means the removal of any kind of pain, the immediate removal of any kind of pain, or the experience of immediate pleasure. So if I'm getting what I want, then that must mean that God is pleased with me. And yet, in Romans chapter 1, we see there's a group of people there who take God's gifts and they turn them inward, and God judges them for it. And do you know how God judges them? He doesn't judge them by taking away the gifts. He doesn't judge them by taking away what he allowed them to have. No. He judges them by allowing them to get exactly what they want. That's how he judges them. And by living it up, getting all that they ever wanted, it destroyed them. But unless something goes wrong, no one ever stops to think about their life. Unless I'm desperate, no one ever stops to think, am I relying on God? Everything must be great. It's like the guy who fell out the 20th story window, and as he was passing the 10th floor, someone heard him say, so far so good. If we're not paying attention, we can misinterpret the good times. And thinking because I've not hit rock bottom, everything must be okay. Everything must be all right. Prosperity is both a gift and a test. A gift so that we might see God, gain a bigger vision of who he is, and a test that we would turn back to God. And when good times come, whether they come as a gift or a test, they are ultimately for us to get more of God's presence. And so since my times are in his hands, the good times shouldn't lead us to pride, and the hard times shouldn't lead us to panic. I've talked about before and in the past, I've talked about some of my OCD issues that I have experienced over the years, and oftentimes I'll make kind of jokes about that, but there came a time in my life when I realized that this was a problem, that it was more than just, oh, that's just what I do. But things that I would do when things that I began to spiritualize it. I would make these things about, like, this is what God, anyways, if you've not been in that kind of place, it's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. And so, for instance, there's a verse of the passage in Ecclesiastes chapter 10 that says, a wise man's heart inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. And that just messed with me. And so when I would walk into a room, if there was something in the way, I would always have to go to the right. I would never say anything about it. But if something was on the right, I would take another route. I wouldn't go. If the left is open but the right is not, I ain't going that route. It's not happening. And so it was just anywhere. It was maddening. Or if I tapped something, it had to be a certain amount of times. It couldn't be this many times. It had to be a certain amount of times. And the thing is because if I don't do those things, then I just know something bad's going to happen. It's just going to happen. Or there have been times when I was in conversation with somebody and I would say something to get a certain response from that person, because they have to say this thing. If they don't say that thing, then I just know something bad's going to happen. And it was absolutely maddening. And what got me through that, and listen, what gets me through that is the realization that I need a bigger vision of God. That my obsession was more of an obsession of control than anything else. Listen, control is an illusion. To think that somehow my ridiculous walking this way or tapping this, or whether someone said a word, that's just ludicrous. That's going to control the fate of the universe, of somebody. Because there is one who is in control, who directs the things that happen, and it's not me, and it's not in my superstitions. Now listen, that's my thing. I'm not saying you have OCD tendencies, but you have your thing. You have your control thing. We talked about last week that our fears and anxieties stem from putting our trust in things that we know that cannot hold us up, and things that can be taken at any moment. To say that another way, that our fears and anxieties can be traced to a lack of confidence in God's sovereignty, that God is the one who is in control. and that he is working it all to lead us to our greatest good, which is more of him. So then whatever gets us more of him is a good gift of God. And oftentimes what gets us there, the means by which we get what we really need, are in and through the hard times. But if our times are in his hands, then when the hard times come, we don't have to panic. Because one, we know that those hard times only come to us if God allows it. And two, that those hard times are limited by only what God allows. You remember the story of Job. Job, he lost it all, right? He loses, he's left with his wife and a few friends who are just telling him to, curse God and die. And so that wasn't even really a gift. He's just left with his kids die, his wealth, he loses his own health, he's in pain. Do you remember how Job got into all of that? Satan came to God and said, can I take these things from him? Can I take these things from Job? If you remember in Luke chapter 22, before Peter, when Jesus is telling Peter that he is going to deny him, do you remember what happens there? Jesus tells Peter, he just kind of clues him in. He says, hey, Peter, Satan has asked me if he could sift you like wheat. But even then, God tells Satan that you can only go so far. With Job, he's like, okay, let me take it. And then he will turn his back on you. He said, well, you can take, well, you can't touch this. God tells Satan he can only go so far. God allows Satan to work, but only to the extent that it serves God's purpose for us. Someone once said that Satan is a lion seeking to devour, but he is a lion on a leash. So if you're in this season, that season of a hard time, maybe it's these days have been hard. Maybe it's these weeks have been difficult. Or perhaps you'd say, no, the years have been hard. Well, listen, the right play in seasons of hard times isn't to shake our fist at heaven, but is to wonder, God, what is it that you're up to? What are you doing? What is it that God is doing in me? What is it that he's wanting to teach me? What does he want to remove from me that would be for my good, that gets me more of him? And God meets us in that place. He reveals things to us in a way, in the hard times, in a way that we cannot see and that we could not see if everything was going well. So some of you have experienced God free you from certain things. Maybe from certain addictions. And listen, we talk about, I feel like we throw that word addictions out and we kind of limit it to certain things, but it's kind of a broad spectrum. And some of you you've been freed from certain addictions, and some of you are still struggling. And so it's in the freedom that God has blessed some. And it's in the struggle that God has chosen to bless others. Because that's what's getting you more of him. Listen, I know if you're going through it right now, this all can seem a bit cliche, seems a bit like, okay, that's what I expect to hear when I go to church. But many of you, listen, we've been here long enough together. We've been through some stuff. We've been through enough things together. Together we have cried and grieved and pleaded with the Lord to change what was happening. We've done this together. We have rejoiced and we have celebrated what God has done. Listen, we have been through enough together that we could look back and we could share the stories. If we wanted to, we could just open it up and share the stories and talk about how God's hand was sovereign in all of it. I know when you're in it, it seems like, yeah, I know that's what I'm supposed to hear. But listen, coming out of it, these are the stories. This is what is true. That God used the good and he used the hard. And he used it to bring me more of him. Jesus said that God is sovereign over the birds. Sovereign over the birds. That he provides for them what they need. He gives them, makes sure they have food. He provides for the birds. There's not one that falls that he doesn't know. If he is that involved with the birds, how much more is he involved in the ones that he has set his love upon? So then we can, with confidence, know that whatever God allows to come to us is exactly what we need for our good and for his glory. That he will not leave us. After all, this is his plan that he's working out. This is his doing. This is his plan that he is seeing through. And maybe we won't see what it was all about tomorrow. And maybe we won't see what it was all about maybe even next year. But listen, even if it takes heaven, even if it takes us getting to heaven, we will one day see how it all came together. And we will spend forever praising him and thanking him that what he started, he finished in us. When Jesus was on the cross, facing the very thing that he had just hours before prayed would not happen, taking upon himself the wrath of God for sinners. He had prayed just hours before this, that I don't want to do this. Let this pass. Fast forward a few hours, here he is. He's on the cross. He is facing the wrath of God in our place for our sin. And in his dying breath, he reaches back to Psalm 31 and he quotes David when David said, "Into your hand I commit my spirit." And that same resurrected King is the one who invites us to bring to him our worries and our fears and our anxieties and our disappointments, as well as our pleasures and prosperity, along with all of the normal, mundane getting up and driving to work, sitting in class, the football practices, the changing the diapers, the making of the dinner, all of it. He invites us to bring all of it and see all of it, that in all of it, God is using it to give us what we need the most, to know him and experience his presence. So I'm not saying that we get all of our questions answered. But even in not having your questions answered and not knowing what's around the corner, the good times, the hard times, what's next? I don't know. What's coming today? What's coming tomorrow morning? What's coming this week? We don't know. So how do you rest? Well, whether things are good or whether it's hard, you are under the care and the sovereign hand of your Father in heaven. Your times are in his hand. That's how you go to sleep at night. Let's pray together.